When we all think of the fair, we usually think of fun. The rides, the junk food, and the walking around with friends and family, just having a great time. Unfortunately, it doesn't always go that way. Even though it isn't frequent, sometimes fairs can be dangerous with unknown predators searching for victims. Today we're going to talk about two girls who disappeared at the state fair and one right after leaving it. We're also going to mention some other cases of disappearances related to fairs. First, let's talk about Charlotte and Cinda. On Saturday, September 26, 1981, friends Charlotte Kinsey and Cinda Pallett were very excited. They not only would be attending the Oklahoma State Fair that day, but for the first time, the 13-year-olds would be allowed to attend without their parents. Cinda's brother Tony would drop the girls off at the fair around noon that day. Then, about 5:30 p.m., the girls both phoned their mothers. They were excited and said that a carnival worker had offered them a job helping him unload stuffed animals from a truck. They asked for permission and their parents agreed, thinking it seemed harmless enough. Both girls were always looking for ways to earn spending money. They said he had also told them he could use their help on Sunday as well. The girls then said they would call back around 9 p.m. that night to arrange for a ride home. However, that phone call would never come. On that Saturday night, about 7 p.m., two boys, who actually knew Charlotte and Cinda, said that they saw both girls. In fact, the man had approached them as well, promising them jobs, and he showed them a yellow name tag. The boys would describe the man as being 6'2", white, between 40 to 50 years of age, with wire-rimmed glasses, a black and gray full beard, and mustache. He was wearing a brown striped cowboy shirt, a flimsy straw hat, and had a belt on with the name Joseph engraved on it. They said the man drove a 1980 or 81 tan Pontiac Grand Prix with South Dakota license plates. He drove the boys to a nearby ballpark where Charlotte and Cinda were waiting. The four youths all got in the stranger's car, and he first stopped at a nearby TG&Y store, where at around 6 or 7 p.m. he went inside and bought the girls each a pair of gloves that he said they would need in order to handle the stuffed animals. The man then dropped off the two boys at the Truck Stops of America at I-40 and Council Road around 7:30 p.m. He gave them $10 and told them to wait for a truck full of stuffed animals to arrive. He then drove off with the girls. The boys were now getting suspicious, so they phoned home as soon as the man left. The boys' parents would then head to the truck stop to pick them up, but they all waited around for an hour before then going home, and the truck never showed up. The boys' parents would soon phone the police. The police started an immediate investigation. They were able to rule out the mystery man being an actual fair employee for the most part, but were not sure if he could have worked for a contract worker there. Also, the fair workers did not have yellow badges like the man showed the teenage boys. Police were unsure initially whether the girls could have run away or whether it was a suspicious disappearance, but the parents were adamant that the girls would not have willingly ran away. They both had good home lives and also had tickets for an upcoming rodeo and concert that they were excited about. There was an extensive search for the girls and scores of volunteers would assist. The families kept vigil at the fairgrounds and printed up flyers to circulate to all of the fairgoers. Police would conduct a booth-by-booth search of the fairgrounds. Unfortunately, there was no trace of the girls, but police would quickly zero in on a suspect. The suspect's name was Don Corey, and he was 36. He was described as a drifter who followed the carnival circuit in the South as well as the Midwest. He had a record of criminal offenses as well as involving juveniles and narcotics. Some children had found a name tag on the midway with Corey's name and a small picture of him. The name tag wasn't issued by the fair, but when it was shown to the two boys who were with Charlotte and Cinda and the unknown man, they identified Corey as the one who propositioned them with a job that night. An arrest warrant was issued for Don Corey for 2 counts of kidnapping. His whereabouts were unknown, so there was a nationwide manhunt for him. Corey was known to suffer stomach pain from complications of an ulcer and would regularly seek medical treatment for it. For this reason, authorities checked hospitals, and it was discovered that Corey had been to various Oklahoma City hospitals from September 21st to the 25th. Authorities finally caught up with Don Corey and took him into custody on October 9th in Greenville, Alabama. Corey was driving a station wagon, which was not the same vehicle description as the teenage boys had described the unknown person driving. However, Corey's vehicle did have South Dakota plates. Police were also able to determine that Don Corey had been in Alabama for the past several days. They then confirmed that he was in Dallas on the day the girls went missing, so the police case against Don Corey quickly fell apart and he was released from custody. Still determined to find the girls, police continued investigating. They eventually learned that the car described by the teenage boys that night was actually a rental car. They were then able to tell who had the car rented that night. He was no stranger to law enforcement. His name was Royal Russell Long. He had been a carny in the past, and at the time of the girls' disappearance, he was a long-haul truck driver. Police, of course, wanted to question Long, but they wouldn't have to conduct a multi-state manhunt like they did to find Don Corey. The authorities knew exactly where Long was. Royal Russell Long was an inmate at the Wyoming State Penitentiary. He had pled guilty to the kidnappings of a 16 and 12-year-old girl and received 2 life sentences. When questioned about Charlotte and Cinda, Long would admit that he was in Oklahoma City the day before the disappearance and had actually visited the state fair on the day the girls disappeared. But he denied having anything to do with their disappearance. Another thing that pointed to Long was he was nearly identical to the composite sketch made of the unknown man. In fact, when Long's ex-wife saw the sketch, she actually phoned police and told them she thought the unknown man was her ex-husband. On May 29, 1985, Royal Russell Long was officially charged with the kidnapping and murder of Cinda Pallett and Charlotte Kinsey. He would then be extradited to Oklahoma to stand trial. The police and district attorney's office would do an exhaustive job learning all they could about Long to build a strong case against him. They interviewed countless witnesses spanning many states. The more authorities learned about Long, the more the outcome was dire concerning what had probably happened to Charlotte and Cinda that night. Royal Russell Long had a history of sexual violence against young girls, even his own daughter. In fact, she would help investigators with information from her own painful childhood in this case, hoping to make her father pay for his crimes. In addition to his molestation of her for most of her childhood, Long's daughter would recant some memories from being on the road with her father that were, in a word, chilling. She has memories of multiple times when she would accompany her father on cross-country road trips. When he would see young girls, he would give his daughter money to go play the pinball machine or buy a soda. He would then lure these girls to his truck with stuffed animals that he kept on hand. When his daughter would return to the truck, the girls would be gone. Long's daughter also told authorities that her father told her that instead of women, he was only interested sexually in young girls and they had to be under 13. This information was important as it showed the same pattern with other girls that it appears was used on Cinda and Charlotte before they disappeared. The survivor of the kidnapping that Long was in jail for would also testify against him at his trial for the murder of Cinda and Charlotte. Her account was hard to listen to. Her name was Sandy Brokenleg. She was 16 and her 12-year-old friend named Sharon Bald Eagle were both hitchhiking on a Wyoming highway when Long picked them up on September 19th, 1984. He told them he was going to get them some food and then take them back to the house so they could clean up and eat. She said when they got there, he offered them $100 to have sex with him. She told him she was not that kind of girl, wherein Long pulled out a gun. She said Long then beat her friend and tied both of them up, and then he raped her. She escaped while he was asleep and went to a neighbor's house for help. She said soon after, she heard Long's pickup truck drive away. When police arrived and searched his home, Long and Sharon Baldeagle were both gone. Sharon has never been found. The district attorney was clear to say that the assault of these two teenagers didn't implicate him in the disappearance of Charlotte, Kinsey, and Cinda Pallett, but it does show what he's like when he's with these young girls. Some more information they learned about Long was a trade that he learned while in prison years earlier in California. He was a meat cutter. In fact, they learned from a fellow inmate of his from Wyoming that Long had actually watched the television coverage of the disappearance of the girls and told the inmate, if you cut the bodies up small enough and stick them in a rat hole, they'll never be found. Police also had evidence to help them in the trial. The car that Long had rented matched the one described by the teenage boys. Several scalp hairs found in the trunk actually came back as a match to Cinda Pallett. There were blonde hairs found in the truck as well, but they were not able to be conclusively matched to Charlotte Kinsey. They would also use luminol in the trunk, which showed the definite presence of blood. After months of hard work and diligently preparing for what they thought was a strong case, the outcome of the trial was shocking. A judge would dismiss the charges against Long in the middle of the trial, saying there was insufficient evidence to prove that he was responsible. According to an attorney on the prosecution side in an interview years later, he recalled that Royal Russell Long walked towards the two girls' parents and said in a whispered voice, "Only I know where those bodies are, and I'm not talking." The prosecution and the girls' family were devastated at the decision. Since the judge had dismissed the charges, Long could never be retried for the murder of the girls. The only solace was that he would never be getting out of prison alive, as he was already serving 2 life sentences, so he would most certainly die in prison. Thankfully, that wouldn't be a long wait, as Royal Russell Long died of natural causes in the Wyoming Penitentiary in 1993. He was 58 years old. Sadly, all these years later, the remains of Charlotte Kinsey and Cinda Pallett have never been found. When you see mention of these girls online, there are several other females mentioned who have seemingly disappeared in relation to affairs, and a surprising amount of them are from Oklahoma, the same state Charlotte and Kinsey disappeared from. However, some of these cases were resolved pretty quickly, so I want to talk about other cases of girls going missing involving affair. Just 4 days after Charlotte and Cinda disappeared, teenagers Cheryl Ann Vaughn and Susan Tollison also disappeared on Sunday, September 30th, 1981, after attending the Oklahoma State Fair. On October 2nd, their car was found along I-40, about 35 miles from the fairground, with the keys in the ignition. The car was found to be in working order, so that wasn't why it was left behind. It wasn't known at first whether Cheryl and Susan could have run away. Her parents didn't think so, and Vaughn had run away from home, but that was 5 years ago. It was a struggle at first to find further information on Cheryl and Susan, which surprised me. Certainly if 4 teenagers had all gone missing within 4 days of each other after attending the same event, it would be big news, and it was for a few days. I did find the resolution to their mysterious disappearance. Many accounts of the girls back then and now refer to her as Susan Thomason, and using that name I didn't find much, but it appears her name is actually Susan Tollison. Upon searching that name, I did find a follow-up article. A few days after the disappearance, Susan's sister phoned the police. She told them that Susan had recently made a collect call to a male friend of hers and told him that both girls were fine. She was also surprised that the police had been searching for them. Apparently, they had chosen to leave. There was a possible sighting of them at 11 p.m. Tuesday night at the Gold Rush nightclub parking lot, which was the night they went missing, so it is unclear if they ever even attended the fair, as they said they were going to. A few years later, I did find where a woman named Susan Tollison applied for a marriage license. This application was from Oklahoma City, and the ages matched up, so it appears that both girls were found safe after their initial disappearance. Then there is a story of two sisters who disappeared after a night at the Oklahoma State Fair. On September 23, 1987, sisters Cheryl Genzer, 25, and Lisa Pennington, 17, disappeared from the state fairgrounds in Oklahoma City. They are thought to have left the fair with Doug Lawson and Lane Henley. However, that next morning, they were nowhere to be found. Henley would say that the girls partied at his house the night before. Lawson would then say that he went to sleep in the morning, and Henley told him that the girls made a late-night phone call and had someone pick them up at a 7-Eleven 4 blocks away. Then, 27 days later, their bullet-ridden bodies were found in shallow graves near Britton, Oklahoma. 5 years after the murders, Doug Lawson was arrested on drug charges, so to shorten his sentence, he stated that Lane Henley had murdered Cheryl and Lisa. Lawson went on to say that the four of them went back to the house that night where they smoked marijuana, drank beer, and snorted cocaine. He then says that Lane Henley murdered both girls. Authorities found Lane Henley living in Dallas in 1990, where they charged him with first-degree murder and extradited him back to Oklahoma. Then 19 months later, right before the murder trial began, Doug Lawson would say that he made up the story that implicated Henley in the murder. Lane Henley was released and moved to Roswell, New Mexico, and Doug Lawson would eventually be sentenced to 5 years in jail for perjury and his false claims. There was another murder that happened almost 10 years later that I also wanted to mention here. In November of 1999 was the last time that 35-year-old Molly Keehee from Roswell, New Mexico was accounted for. Her sister would officially report her missing 2 months later in January of 2000. Then in March of 2000, Molly's remains were found buried in a shallow grave 15 miles from Roswell. She had been shot to death. Why am I including this murder? Because Molly Kee's live-in boyfriend was none other than Lane Henley. So now there are 3 young women all found murdered and buried in shallow graves. The one thing we know that they have in common is that they were all reportedly with Lane Henley before they disappeared. Police haven't named Henley as an official suspect in any of the murders, and there have been no arrests in their cases. The next case we're going to talk about is Misty Copsey. It was September 17, 1992, and at 3:30 p.m. when Diana Copsey dropped off her 14-year-old daughter Misty and her friend Trina Brevard at the Puyallup Fairgrounds, now referred to as the Washington State Fair. The girls promised they would find their own way home. Misty had planned to take the 8:40 p.m. Pierce Transit bus, which would have taken her back to her neighborhood in Spanaway. This was the first time Misty had been given the freedom to get herself back home. Her mother remembers telling Misty, "If you screw up this time, I'm never going to let you do this again." Shortly after 8 p.m., Diana Copsey received a call from Misty telling her that she had missed the bus. Misty wanted to phone her 18-year-old friend Reuben Schmidt, who had a car, for a ride. Her mother said no to that idea. She said, "I don't like that kid. Call someone else, then call me back." Misty promised her mom she would call her back, but that call would never come. Diana Copsey worked overnight as a caregiver, so she rushed home the next morning and began to panic when her daughter was not there. She immediately called 911, and from the beginning, the police seemed to think that Misty ran away. She would continue to battle with police, who insisted that Misty was a runaway. Diana Copsey called Reuben Schmidt, and he said that Misty did call him, but he didn't have enough gas, so he didn't go get her. She also talked to Trina, who was with Misty that night. Trina said that while Misty was waiting at the bus stop, she decided to walk home. Diana Copsey then decided to call Reuben back. He wasn't home, but his roommate James Tinsley answered the phone. She asked Tinsley if Reuben had been home all night the night before. Tinsley's answer surprised Misty's mother. He said no, him and his uncle left to go get Misty. Diana then called a third time looking for Reuben, and this time he answered the phone. He told her that his roommate was wrong. He had gone to a party last night. He didn't pick up Misty. He didn't know where she was. Trina had said that when she left Misty, it was at the bus stop. A bus driver came forward and said that he had spoke to Misty Copsey around 9:20 p.m. Misty asked him when the last bus left for Spanaway. Before the driver could find out the information, she walked off into the night distressed. That was apparently the last time Misty Copsey was ever seen. Then, 5 months after Misty's disappearance, Diana Copsey and her friends were out searching when they found a pair of jeans in a muddy ditch near State Highway 410. Diana was positive they were her daughter's jeans that she was wearing that night. Part of the reason she was so certain they were actually her jeans that Misty had borrowed that day. Inside one of the pant legs was a sock and a pair of underwear. King County Police collected the items for testing. This would seem to bring law enforcement into the case more, since the jeans possibly being Misty's would point to a foul play scenario. 5 months after Misty's disappearance, police would finally interview Trina, who was with her that night. She also said that Misty did call Reuben Schmidt for a ride. When Reuben told her he didn't have gas, Misty proceeded to tell him how to get into her house and go to her bedroom and get some money that she had. He still refused. The police would finally then interview Reuben for the first time. Reuben Schmidt would first evade the police, but would eventually talk to them. He said that Misty called him twice that night. The first time he told her no, that he had no gas. Then she called him back and told him how to get into her house. He refused then. He would tell the police that he suffered a blackout and couldn't remember anything after Misty's call. He also told them the next day that he drove to his grandmother's farm in Buckley, but he couldn't remember why. The jeans were found about 8 miles from his grandmother's property. Police would then interview 15-year-old James Tinsley, whom Reuben Schmidt was staying with at the time of Misty's disappearance. His accounts of that night would differ quite a bit from his roommates. Tinsley said that when Misty called Reuben, he had his 13-year-old girlfriend with him. Reuben was 18, remember. Tinsley said Reuben seemed like he wanted to go pick Misty up, but his girlfriend didn't want him to. The girlfriend soon left the house, and after she did, Reuben Schmidt left too. Tinsley said that was weird because he would usually tell him where he was going or take Tinsley with him. He arrived back home late that night after Tinsley was asleep and never told him where he had gone. This is noteworthy because now it seemed that when Misty was unaccounted for that night, for a while anyway, so was Reuben. Then Trina Brevard seemed to change her story from that night. Instead of walking home while Misty waited at the bus stop, she would confide to a friend that her boyfriend, 23-year-old Michael Reiner, remember Trina was 15, actually had picked her up that night and driven her home. When police found out about this new information, they examined Reiner for months. They even secretly bought his blue 1981 Ford Escort when it came up for sale. After testing, there would be no evidence of a crime found inside. They also tried to track down Reuben's car, but found out it had been destroyed at the wrecking yard in June. Both Reuben Schmidt and Michael Reiner would eventually take and pass polygraph tests, so police started to look elsewhere for answers in this disappearance. Considering where the jeans were found that Diana Copsey was positive belonged to her daughter, police had a new possible concern. This area was reportedly not far from where the remains of two girls were found who disappeared a few years prior. Kimberly DeLange disappeared in July of 1988. Her remains were found the next month. Anna Chobotny went missing in August of 1990, and her remains were found 13 months later in September of 1991. With two victims and the possible clothes of another one all found close to each other, was there a serial killer at large? The police were still not positive that Misty had not run away. They had to still consider that as a possibility. But with the finding of the jeans, they started to lean towards foul play in her disappearance. It did get some attention in the media. It was even the topic of a TV show on the local Channel 7 in May of 1996. The show was called Paranormal Borderline. As it was described, 3 psychic detectives would be given a sealed envelope with photos, maps, and some of Misty Copsey's personal items. Then the 3 of them will give their impressions of what happened to the teen. It would give some added attention to the case, but not surprising, the show wouldn't help to get any answers in the teen's disappearance. In May of 2000, at the request of her mother, the medical examiner issued a death certificate for Misty Copsey. Her mother had long since believed that her daughter was dead and wanted to have a memorial service for her while Misty's grandfather was still alive, and he was now gravely ill. Then on June 24, 2000, a memorial service was held for Misty Copsey. Her mother didn't have the funds to pay for it, so merchants and donations from townspeople stepped in to help with the cost. It seemed that the rift between the police force from 1992 and Diana Copsey, now Smith, would never heal. She was still bitter that they had considered Misty a runaway at the beginning and wouldn't even really start the investigation until after the jeans were found. I also want to mention something about the jeans. Even though Diana insisted from the beginning that she was positive they were the jeans that her daughter was wearing that night, testing could never conclusively prove it. Police have even speculated at times that Misty's mother and her supporters could have planted the jeans in an effort to get the police to finally investigate the case. Sadly, Diana Copsey Smith would pass away in February of 2020 after spending the last almost 28 years of her life seeking justice for and trying to find her daughter. With her now gone, Misty's half-brother that she never got to meet, Colton Smith, has now taken up the cause. He wants answers as to what happened to the sister that he never got to know. He also wants to hold the person or persons responsible accountable for the crime. Lastly, there is another name that is sometimes mentioned along with these cases, and I have found a resolution in her case as well. On Sunday, October 4th, 1992, 15-year-old Tanya Thompson went to the State Fair Championship Rodeo in Oklahoma City with a friend. She excused herself to go to the restroom and never came back. There was concern because she had no history of running away. The police did investigate, and thankfully she was found safe a few days later at her former foster home in Stillwater and returned to her family. As far as my thoughts on these cases, there is probably nothing that I'm going to say that will surprise you. First off, Charlotte Kinsey and Cinda Pallett is such a heartbreaking case. In the last phone call to their mothers, I'm sure the girls were so excited to be able to earn extra money and wanted to include their family in on the good news. To think of the terror that they experienced not long after, when they realized there was no truck to unload and that it was a trap, is just horrible. I definitely think that Royal Russell Long is responsible for their disappearance and subsequent death. He admitted to being at the fair the night they disappeared. He looked identical to the composite, was ID'd by the teenage boys who were there that night, and had a history of luring little girls to his truck. Cinda's hair was also found in his trunk. As far as Cheryl Genzer and Lisa Pennington's murder, there's so little to go on. I think that Lane Henley should definitely be considered a suspect. Considering he was one of the last people to see the girls alive, Their bodies were found only a mile from his house, and years later, his live-in girlfriend was found murdered as well. I'm unsure if there are any other suspects, but I did find a news article from 2023 about these murders. The families are still diligently searching for answers and want a grand jury convened to see if there is enough evidence in their murders to charge someone. Cheryl Ann Vaughn, Susan Tollison, and Tanya Thompson were at first suspected of being abducted. They were soon discovered to be runaways, however, and the best news being that they were found alive and well. As far as Misty Copsey, her disappearance is a little tougher to figure out. She was so vulnerable out there alone in the dark, literally anyone could have picked her up. It certainly could have been the unknown killer of Kimberly DeLange and Anna Chobotny. Their bodies were found not far from where Misty's jeans were found, if they really were her jeans. However, I certainly don't discount Reuben Schmidt being a suspect, whether or not he passed a polygraph test. Misty knew him and would have gotten in his car. She literally called him to come pick her up that night. He claims that he said no, but then his roommate says he inexplicably leaves shortly after and is gone for an extended period of time. Then he conveniently claims to have blacked out and can't say what he did next. This blackout was convenient in that it would make his whereabouts impossible to confirm. So there you have several teenagers who disappeared after going to the fair. 3 of them were found alive and well, thankfully. 2 of them were murdered and their bodies were found fairly soon after. 3 of them are still missing to this day. The outcome for them appears to be dire, but perhaps one day their remains can be found and returned to their family. It would also be helpful to their loved ones if we can find out what happened that night during their final farewell. That concludes my podcast on Charlotte, Cinda, and Misty. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find my podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music under one word, Lost and Found Podcast. I also have a website where you can read all of my articles, as well as links to my latest podcast episodes at Lost and Found Blogs. I have social media accounts under that name on Facebook, X, and Instagram. You can reach me via email at lostandfoundpodcast@yahoo. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.